Chapter for a Professed Knight. Gervase was soon quite at home in the palace of the Grand Master, and his companions were, like other boys, of varying characters, but as all were of noble families, were strongly impressed with the importance of the order and the honor of their own position, and were constantly in contact with stately knights and grave officials. Their manners conformed to those of their elders, and even among themselves there was no rough fun or loud disputes, but a certain courtesy of manner that was in accordance with their surroundings. This came naturally to Gervase, brought up as he had been by his father and mother, and having at frequent intervals stayed with them for months at the various royal castles in which Margaret of Anjou and her son had been assigned apartments during their exile. Even at St. John's House the novices with whom he lived were all a good deal older than himself, and the discipline of the house was much more strict than that at Rhodes. He enjoyed both his exercises with the knights and the time spent with the sub-chaplain, no small proportion of the hours of study being occupied in listening to stories of chivalry, it being considered one of the most important parts of a knight's education that he should have a thorough acquaintance, not only with the laws of chivalry, but with the brave deeds both of former and of living knights, with the relations of the noble houses of Europe to each other, especially of the many great families whose members were connected with the Order of St. John. These matters formed, indeed, the main subject of their studies. All were taught to read and write, but this was considered sufficient in the way of actual instruction. The rules of the order had to be committed to memory. Beyond this their reading consisted largely of the lives of saints, especially of those who distinguished themselves by their charity or their devotion to their vows of poverty, to both of which the members of the order were pledged. Gervase, however, could see around him no signs whatever of poverty on their part. It was true that they all lived and fed together in the auberges of their respective longs, and that they possessed no houses or establishments of their own, but the magnificence of their armor and attire, and the lavish expenditure of some upon their pleasures, contrasted strangely with the poverty to which they had vowed themselves. It was true that in many cases the means to support the expenditure was derived from the shares the knights received of the plunder acquired in their captures of Moslem ships, but undoubtedly many must have possessed large private means, the bailiffs, for example, although only required by the rules to place before the knights at their auberge the rations they received for them, with such luxuries as could be purchased by their yearly allowance for that purpose, expended annually very large sums in addition, and supplied their tables with every dainty, in order to gain popularity and goodwill among the members of the langue. Not only did the post of bailiff confer upon its owner a very high position at Rhodes, but it was a stepping stone to the most lucrative offices in their longues. The bailiffs at Rhodes had the right of claiming any of the grand priories or bailiwicks at home that might fall vacant, and the Grand Master was frequently chosen from among their number, as, by being present at Rhodes, they had many advantages in the way of making themselves popular among the electors. The emoluments of some of these provincial bailiwicks were large, and as the bailiffs at Rhodes were generally elected by seniority, although younger knights who had greatly distinguished themselves were sometimes chosen, they were usually glad to resign the heavy work and responsibility of their position at Rhodes, and to retire to the far easier position of a provincial bailiff. In the majority of cases, doubtless, the fortunes of the high officials were obtained from the money amassed when in possession of rich commanderies at home, but even this was assuredly incompatible with their vows of poverty. His hours of leisure Gervase spent either on the water or in the saddle, and his love of exercise of all sorts excited the wonder and even the amusement of his companions, who for the most part preferred spending the time at their disposal in sleep, in idly looking out from a shaded room at what was going on outside, or in visits to friends and relations at the auberge of the longues to which they belonged. The natural consequence was that by the time he reached the end of his 3 years' pageship, Gervase was indisputably superior in strength, activity, and skill in military exercises to any of his companions. The majority of these, after completing their time, returned to the headquarters of their langue at home, to pass their time there, until of an age to be eligible for the charge of a commandery obtained for them by family influence, which had no small share in the granting of these appointments. As it was known, however, that Gervase intended to remain permanently in the island, his progress was watched with particular attention by his instructors, and, seeing his own earnestness in the matter, they took special pains with his training. The bailiff of Oven continued to take much interest in him, inquiring often from the officers in charge of the pages, and from his instructors of his conduct and progress, and occasionally sending for him to his auberge and talking with him as to his life and progress. Just before his pageship terminated, he said to him, "I was rather puzzled at first, Gervase, as to what we should do with you when your term of office concluded, but I am so no longer, for, although you are some 2 years younger than the professed knights who come out here, you are better fitted than the majority to take your place in the naval expeditions and to fight the Moslem pirates. I will see that you have your share of these adventures. All young knights are, as you know, obliged to make 3 voyages, but beyond that many of them do not care to share in the rough life at sea, and prefer the bustle, and, I grieve to say, the gaiety and pleasures of this city. For one, then, really eager to distinguish himself, the opportunities are frequent. When danger threatens, or heavy engagements are expected, every knight is desirous of bearing his part in the fray, but this is not the case when the work to be done consists of scouring the sea for weeks, without perchance coming across a single pirate. Of course, as soon as your pageship is over you will go to the English auberge, but I shall still keep my eye upon you, and shall do my best to help you to achieve distinction, and I shall take upon myself the providing of your arms and armor as a knight. Accordingly, on the day on which his duties as a page terminated, 2 servitors of the auberge of Oven brought across to the palace a suit of fine armor and a sword, a battle-axe, a lance, and a dagger, also 3 complete suits of clothes, 2 of them for ordinary wear, and 1 for state occasions. The next day Gervase took the oaths of the order in the church of St. John. The aged master himself received the vows, and formally inducted him as a professed knight of the order, Peter d'Aubuisson and the bailiff of the English langue acting as his sponsors, vouching that he was of noble blood and in all ways fitted to become a knight of justice, this being the official title of the professed knights of the order. 10 newly arrived novices were inducted at the same time, and the ceremony was a stately one, attended by a number of the knights from each langue, all in full armor. The ceremony over, Gervase bore the title of Sir Gervase Traceham, but this was an honorary rather than a real title, as the order did not profess to bestow the honor of knighthood, and it was usual for its members to receive the accolade at the hands of secular knights. At the conclusion of the ceremony, he returned with the bailiff of the English langue to the auberge, and took up his quarters there. By his frequent visits he was well known to all the members, and in a day or 2 felt as much at home as he had done in the page's room in the palace. A week was given to him before he was assigned to any special duty, and he was glad when he was told off as one of the knights who were to take their turn in superintending the work of the slaves employed in strengthening the fortifications, although he would rather that any other employment should have been assigned to him, because he felt deep pity for the unfortunate men who were engaged in the work. He knew well enough that if he himself were ever made prisoner by the Turks, his lot would be as hard and as hopeless as that of the Moslem captives, but this, although he often repeated it to himself in order to abate his feeling of commiseration, was but a poor satisfaction. He saw one side of the picture, and the other was hidden from him, and although he told himself that after slaving in a Turkish galley, he would feel a satisfaction at seeing those who had been his tyrants suffering the same fate, he was well aware that this would not be the case, and that his own sufferings would only make him sympathize more deeply with those of others. He had found, soon after his arrival on the island, that it was best to keep his feelings on this subject to himself. While the knights were bound, in accordance with their vows, to relieve sufferings of any kind among Christians, they seemed to regard their captives rather in the light of brute beasts than human beings. The slaves were struck on the smallest provocation, and even the killing of a slave was considered a very venial offense, and punished only because the slave was of value to the order. It was true that edicts were from time to time published by the council, enjoining fair treatment of slaves, and it was specially ordered that those employed as servants in the auberge were not to be struck. The lot of these servants was, indeed, very much easier than that of those engaged on the public works, and such occupation was therefore considered a privilege, the servants being for the most part selected from among the captives of superior rank. For the next 6 months Gervase worked at various duties in the town. He was employed for a fortnight in the infirmary, then for a while he was transferred to the galleys, but for the most part he was with the slaves working on the fortifications. At the end of that time he was, to his great delight, informed by the bailiff that he was one of the 6 knights of the langue told off to join a galley that was on the point of sailing. Among those going in her was Sir Ralph Harcourt, one of his companions on the journey from England. "So you are to go with us, Gervase," the young knight said, "to try your luck for the first time against the infidels. This is my 3rd voyage, and I hope that it will be more fortunate than its predecessors, for, beyond picking up 2 or 3 small craft, which did not venture upon resistance, we gained neither honor nor booty. I regard you as having specially good fortune, and besides being glad that we shall be together, I expect that you will bring good luck to us, and that we shall meet with foes worth contending with. The corsairs have been Do you see anything of them, Sir Ralph? The commander shouted, as they came close. We have seen no ships, Sir Louis, but there is smoke coming up from a bay in an island 4 or 5 miles away to the southwest. It seems to us that it is far too extensive a fire to be the result of an accident, for there was no smoke until within 2 or 3 minutes of the time we left, and before we started it was rising from several points, and we both think that it must come from a village that has been attacked by pirates. The commander rapidly issued his orders, and in 2 or 3 minutes the anchor was weighed, the boat hoisted on deck, and the oars in motion. Stretch to your oars! Ricord shouted to the slaves. Hitherto we have exacted no toil from you, but you have to work now, and woe be to him who does not put out his full strength. Grateful for the unusual leniency with which they had been treated, the slaves bent to their oars, and the galley sped rapidly through the water. On rounding the end of the island there was an exclamation of satisfaction from the knights, as they saw wreaths of white smoke rising from the distant island. There can be no doubt that it is a village in flames, Sir Louis said, and from the suddenness with which it broke out, it is clear that it must have been fired at several points. You say you saw no craft near? He asked, turning to Harcourt. There were none there, or from the top of the hill we should assuredly have made them out, Sir Louis. Then the pirates, if this be, as I hope, their work, must have landed at some other point on the island, and if they catch sight of us they may make for their ship and slip away, unobserved by us. Instead of rowing direct, therefore, we will make for that islet to the right, and row round behind it. There are 2 others almost adjoining it. Once past these, 'tis not more than half a mile to that island stretching away south. Once round that, we shall be beyond the one from which we see the smoke rising, and can come down on its southern side. The course will be double the distance that it would be if we took a straight line, but except when we cross from island to island we shall not be exposed to their view, and may fall upon their ships before the crews have returned from their work of plunder. The knights fully agreed, and orders were given to the helmsman accordingly. We must not over-fatigue the rowers, the commander said. We may have a long chase if they have started before we get round. He therefore gave orders to the slaves that, while they were to exert themselves to the utmost when crossing the open sea, they were to relax their efforts and to row within their strength while coasting along behind the islands. On board, everything was made in readiness for a fight. The knights buckled on their armor, the cook set cauldrons of pitch over the fire, the cannoneers loaded her 8 guns. It was an hour and a half after their start before they rounded the end of the last island. It extended a little farther to the south than did that to which they were making, and as they rounded the point, eager looks were cast in search of the pirate ships. No craft were, however, to be seen. They must be in some bay or inlet, the commander said. They can hardly have left, for it would have taken them half an hour at least to cross the island with their booty and captives, and even if they made straight away after having fired the village, their ship could have gone no great distance, for we must have seen her if she put to sea, unless indeed they were anchored on the east of the island, and have sailed in that direction. Keep them rowing along steadily, he said to the overseers of the slaves, but do not press them too hard. We may have a chase yet, and need all their strength, for most of these pirates are fast craft, and if they should get a start of 3 or 4 miles, it will be a long row before we catch them. They made straight for the island, and on nearing it coasted along its southern side. It was some 3 miles long, the shore being for the most part steep, but here and there falling gradually to the water's edge. 2 or 3 little clusters of houses could be seen as they rowed along. One of these was on fire. That is good, Sir Louis exclaimed, as, on turning a point, they saw the flames. That cannot have been lighted long, and we are pretty certain to come upon the vessels before the marauders have set sail. Several inlets and small bays were passed, but all were empty. A few fishing boats lay on the shore, but there were no signs of life, as no doubt the people would, long since, have taken alarm and sought shelter in the woods. There was a sharp point just before they reached the southeastern extremity of the island, and as the galley shot past this, a shout of exultation rose from the knights, for, near the mouth of an inlet that now opened to their view, there lay 4 long, low vessels, above each of which floated the Moslem flag. A number of men were gathered on the shore near the ships, and heavily laden boats were passing to and fro. A yell of rage and alarm rose from the ships as the galley came into view. There was a stir and movement on the shore, and numbers of men leapt into the boats there and started for the ships. These were some quarter of a mile away when first seen, and half that distance had been traversed when a puff of smoke shot out from the side of one of them, followed almost immediately by a general discharge of their cannon. One ball tore along the waist of the galley, killing 6 of the rowers, and several oars on both sides were broken. 2 balls passed through the cabins in the poop. But there was no pause in the advance of the galley. The whips of the slave masters cracked, and the rowers whose oars were intact strained at them. There was no reply from the guns, but the knights raised loud the war cry of the order, a war cry that was never heard without striking a thrill of apprehension among their Moslem foes. As they neared the pirate ships, the helm was put down, and the galley brought up alongside the largest of them, and a broadside poured into her. Then the knights, headed by their commander, leapt onto her deck. Although a number of the crew had not yet come off from shore, the Moslems still outnumbered their assailants, and, knowing that their consorts would soon come to their aid, they threw themselves in a body on the Christians. But in a hand-to-hand conflict like this, the knights of the hospital were irresistible. Protected by their armor and long shields from the blows of their enemies' scimitars and daggers, their long, cross-handled swords fell with irresistible force on turbaned head and coat of mail, and, maintaining regular order and advancing like a wall of steel along the deck, they drove the Moslems before them, and the combat would soon have terminated had not a shout been raised by one of the overseers of the slaves. One of the other ships had rowed alongside the galley, and the crew were already leaping on board it. At the same moment another ship came up alongside that they had boarded, while the fourth was manoeuvring to bring up under her stern. "Sir John Boswell," Sir Louis shouted, "do you and your countrymen, with the Knights of Spain, finish with these miscreants. Knights of Germany and Provence, keep back the borders. Knights of Auvergne, follow me," and he leapt down into the galley. The English and Spanish knights redoubled their exertions. The Moslems endeavored to rally, seeing that help was at hand, and that but a small body were now opposed to them. But their numbers availed little. The 10 knights kept their line, and, hewing their way forward, pressed them so hotly that the Turks broke and sprang over the bulwarks into the sea. Then the knights looked round. A fierce fight was going on between those of Germany and Provence and the enemy, who strove desperately to board from the ship alongside. The other vessel was now almost touching the stern, and her crew were swarming to her side in readiness to leap on board as soon as the vessels touched. "We will keep them at bay there," Sir John Boswell shouted. "Do you, Don Pedro, and your comrades, aid Record. When his foes are finished with, you can come back to help us." Then, with the 4 English knights, he ran along the deck and reached the stern just in time to hurl backwards the Moslems, who had already obtained a footing. For a time the 5 knights kept back the surging mass of their foes. The deck was wide enough for each to have fair play for his sword, and in vain the pirates strove to obtain a footing. At last Sir Marmaduke Lumley fell, severely wounded by an arrow from a Moslem marksman, and before the others could close the gap a score of pirates leapt onto the deck. "Fall back, comrades, fall back, but keep together," Sir John Boswell shouted as he cleft the skull of one of the pirate officers who sprang at him. "Sir Louis will soon finish his work and be here to our aid." "Ah," he exclaimed, looking over his shoulder as he retired a step, "Provence and Germany are overmatched too." This was indeed the case. Stoutly as they fought, the knights were unable to guard the whole of the line of bulwark, and the Moslems had already obtained a footing on the deck. The discipline of the knights stood them in good stead. Drawing closely together as they retreated, they made a stand on the opposite side of the deck, and were here joined by Sir John Boswell and his companions. They now formed a semicircle, each flank resting on the bulwark, and the pirates in vain endeavored to break their line. Again and again they flung themselves upon the knights, only to be beaten off with heavy loss. At length a loud cheer arose from the galley, and Sir Louis Record, with the knights of Auvergne and Spain, having cleared the galley of their foes, and carried the pirate that had grappled with her, sprang on to the deck of the ship, and fell upon the throng that were attacking the knights there, oblivious of what was going on elsewhere. At once the English knights and their comrades took the offensive, and fell upon their assailants who, at the sight of the reinforcement, for a moment stood irresolute. For a short time there was a fierce struggle, then the pirates sprang back to their 2 ships, and endeavored to cast off the grapnels. But the knights followed hotly upon them, and, panic-stricken now, the pirates sprang overboard. Many were drowned, but the greater part managed to swim to shore. Chapter 5: Scourges of the Sea. Breathless and faint from their tremendous exertions, the knights removed their helmets. "By St. Mary," Sir Louis said, this has been as hard a fight as I have ever been engaged in, and well may we be content with our victory. Well fought, my brave comrades. Each of these vessels must have carried twice our number at least, and we have captured 4 of them, but I fear the cost has been heavy. 7 knights had fallen, struck down by sword, arrow, or thrust of spear. Of the rest, but few had escaped unwounded, for, strong as was their armor, the keen Damascus blades of the Moslems had in many cases cut clean through it, and their daggers had found entry at points where the armor joined, and, now that the fight was over, several of the knights sank exhausted on the deck from loss of blood. But the dressing of wounds formed part of a Knight of St. John's training. Those who were unwounded unbuckled the armor and bandaged the wounds. Others fetched wine and water from the galley. The chains of the galley slaves were removed, and these were set to clear the decks of the Moslem corpses. The anchors were dropped, for what little wind there was drifted them towards the shore. They had learned from a dying pirate that the vessels were part of the fleet of Hassan Ali, a fact that added to the satisfaction felt by the knights at their capture, as this man was one of the most dreaded pirates of the Levant. They learnt that he himself had not been present, the expedition being under the command of one of his lieutenants, who had fallen in the fight. Now, comrades, let us in the first place take food. We have not broken our fast this morning. Then let us consider what had best be done, for indeed we have got as much in our hands as we can manage, but let us leave that till we eat and drink, for we are faint from want of food and from our exertions. But we shall have to eat what comes to hand, and that without cooking, for our servants all joined the pirates when they boarded us, and are either dead or are ashore there. A meal was made of bread and fruit, and this with wine sufficed to recruit their energies. It seems to me, comrades, Sir Louis said, when all had finished, that the first thing is to search the holds of these vessels and see what valuables are stored there. These may be all carried on board one ship, and the others must be burnt, for it is clear that, as there are 4 of them, we cannot take them to Rhodes, and even with 1 and our galley we should fare but ill if we fell in with 2 or 3 more of Hassan's ships. But how about the pirates on shore, Sir Louis? A knight asked. There were very many who could not get off to their ships during the fight, and scores must have swum ashore. I should say that there must be full 200, and it will be a grievous thing for the islanders if we leave them there. It is certain, the commander said, that we are not strong enough to attack them, for were we to land, a party would have to be left on board, or the pirates might elude our search, see some fishing boats, and regain possession. Certainly, we are in no position to divide our forces. Methinks, Sir John Boswell said, that the best plan would be to send a boat, manned with 10 galley slaves, taking 2 or 3 of us to the rendezvous, to fetch hither the other 2 galleys. With their aid we might take all the 4 ships safe into port, after first clearing the island of these pirates. It is but 40 miles away, and 8 hours rowing would take us there. There was a general murmur of assent, for all wished that the trophies of their bravery should, if possible, be carried to Rhodes. That will certainly be the best plan, Sir John, though it may detain us here for 2 or 3 days, or even more, for it is quite uncertain when the other 2 galleys may put in at the rendezvous. Will you yourself undertake the mission? With pleasure. How many will you take with you? 2 will be sufficient, for we shall have no fighting to do, as we shall have to trust to our speed if we fall in with an enemy. I will take, with your permission, Sir Ralph Harcourt and Sir Gervase Tresham, both of whom have today fought with distinguished bravery. Indeed, I owe my life to them, for more than once, when I was hotly pressed, they freed me from my assailants. Truly none bore themselves better in the fray than they did. 3 or 4 others joined in hearty commendations of the 2 young knights. Indeed, one said, I was greatly surprised to see how Tresham bore himself. He is but a lad, with scarce, one would think, strength to hold his own in such a fray. It chanced that he was next to me in the circle, and for a time I kept my eye on him, thinking he might require my aid, but I soon saw that I need not trouble myself on his account, for he wielded his weapon as doubtly as the best knight of the order could have done, and one of the proofs is that, while most of us bear marks of the conflict, he has escaped without scratch. I trust, Sir Louis, that when you give an account of the fighting you will specially mention that this, the youngest knight of the order, bore himself as stoutly as any of them. I say this, Sir John, because, not being of your lang, I can speak more warmly than you can do of his skill and bravery. I thank you, de Boise, Sir John Boswell said, and I am proud that my young countryman should have so gained your approbation. And now, he went on, while the galley slaves are getting a meal, which they have right well earned today, I should like to see what there is under the hatches of these ships, so that I can give our comrades in the other galleys some idea of the value of this booty we have taken. They rose from the table, and, going on board the prizes, lifted the hatches. Beware! De Boisy exclaimed, looking down into the hold, when the first hatch was taken off. There are people below. A chorus of cries followed his exclamation. They are the voices of women and children, Sir Louis exclaimed. They must be captives. This turned out to be so. In the holds of the 4 ships were found over 150 women and children. These had been brought on board in the first boat loads by the pirates, and when the Christian galley had been seen coming round the point, had been thrust below, and the hatches thrown over them. They had heard the din of battle above, but knew not how the conflict had terminated, and, being afraid to cry out, had remained silent until, on the hatch being lifted, they had seen the figures of Christian knights standing in the bright sunshine. All had come from the village on the other side of the island. They related how the pirates had suddenly burst upon them, had slaughtered all the men, set fire to the village, and had driven them before them across the island to the ships. The poor creatures were delighted at their escape from slavery, but at the same time were full of grief at the loss of husbands, fathers, and sons. Some laughed, others cried, while some thanked God for their rescue, others heaped imprecations upon the authors of their misfortunes. The knights explained to them that for a short time they must remain on board, as half the pirates were still on shore, but that aid would soon arrive that would enable them to clear the island. Half an hour later Sir John Boswell, with the 2 young knights, started in a rowing boat, manned by 10 of the galley slaves. The wind had sprung up since the fight ceased, and as it was nearly astern, they anticipated that they would make a good passage, and be at the little islet, named as the place of rendezvous, before nightfall. Among the many bales of rich merchandise in the hold of the pirate vessels an abundance of wine had been discovered, and of this a tankard had been given to each of the slaves, by Sir Louis's orders, as a token of satisfaction at their work in the morning. They had gone some 2 miles when, from one of the inlets in the island they had left, a large fishing boat was seen to issue out. "By St. George!" Sir John exclaimed, "that boat must be full of pirates. And if they see us, which they cannot help doing, and take it in their heads to chase us, we shall have a hard time of it." The fishing boat for a few minutes kept along the coast, and then suddenly her course was altered, and her head directed towards their boat. "Now stretch to your oars," Sir John, who spoke some Turkish, said to the slaves. "Keep ahead of that boat, and I promise you, on my honor as a Christian knight, that I will myself purchase your freedom as soon as we get to Rhodes." With a shout of delight, the galley slaves bent to their oars, and the boat flew along at a greatly increased speed. "There is but small chance of our getting away," Sir John said quietly. "At present we must be rowing as fast as they sail, but wind never tires, while there are limits to the powers of muscle and bone. If those fellows follow us, and I doubt not that they will, for they must be thirsting for vengeance, they will overtake us long before we get to the rendezvous, and even did we reach it, the chances are that we should not find either of the galleys there. We must hold on as long as we can, and as a last resource must run ashore. Unfortunately, there are no large islands on our way. Nor have we any hope of assistance from our friends behind. The inlet looks east, and they will know nothing of our danger, nor, if they did, could they help us. The galley is short-handed now, and there are the captured ships to look after, and the captives we rescued. We have only ourselves to depend on." At the end of an hour's rowing the boat astern had gained little, but the exertions of the rowers were telling severely upon them. They were still doing their best, but their breath came in short gasps, the rowing was getting short and unsteady, and there was a sensible decrease in the speed of the boat. 3 miles ahead of them was an islet about half a mile in diameter. In some parts it was covered with foliage, but elsewhere it was bare rock. "That must be our goal," Sir John said. "They will be close to us by the time we get there." Then he said to the rowers, "Stop for a minute to get breath. We will land at that islet ahead, and I shall hold to my promise if we get there in time. Those of you who like can remain in the boat until your countrymen come up, those who choose can leave the boat and hide yourselves as best you may. I leave the choice to yourselves. If we are overtaken and fall, I cannot keep my promise, and it will be best then for you to remain in the boat." For 3 or 4 minutes the slave looked for something to stave in a plank, Tresham. Jervis leapt down into the hold. There were some nets and spare sails lying there, but nothing that would answer the purpose. He examined the planks. The boat was very strongly and roughly built. There is nothing here, Sir John, that will do, and nothing short of a heavy sledge-hammer would suffice to smash one of these planks. There are a lot of them coming down the hill, Tresham. We have not many minutes to spare, but we must disable the craft. They will soon be after us again. They have run her hard and fast here, but when they all come back they will soon get her off. Let us try one of these sweeps. He lifted one of the heavy oars, and holding it upright he and Jervis together tried to drive the handle through the bottom. Again and again they raised it and drove it down, but the plank was too strong and too securely fastened to the timbers. We must give it up, the knight said, with a sigh. Fortune has befriended us so far, Tresham, but she has deserted us at last. Another 3 minutes, and we shall have 30 or 40 of them upon us. At this moment the lad's eye fell upon the fire. We shall manage yet, he exclaimed, and, seizing a blazing brand, he jumped below and set fire to the sails stowed there. They were as dry as tinder, and the flame shot up at once. That is good, Tresham, the knight said, but they will put it out before it has caught the boat. Not before it has burnt the sails, Jervis replied. Now for this one, and he applied the brand to the lower edge of the great sail. Without a word Sir John seized another brand, and fired the sail on the other side of the deck. The flames flashed up, and a wild yell of rage and alarm broke from the pirates, who were now rushing down towards the beach. Now to the boat, Tresham, we have no time to lose if we would avoid being pounded with stones. They dropped over the stern into the boat. The galley slaves dipped their oars into the water, and she shot away just as the foremost of the pirates reached the edge of the water. A few stones were thrown, but the pirates were so anxious about the craft, by which alone they could escape from the island, that the majority at once climbed on board. At a word from the knight, the slaves stopped rowing 100 yards from the shore. The sail was already consumed, and the yard and the upper part of the mast were in flames. A dense smoke was rising from the hold, and the pirates were throwing buckets of water down into it. In a few minutes the smoke decreased. I thought that they would be able to put it out, but, as far as we are concerned, it matters little. They have lost their sails, and as I saw but for sweeps, we can travel 5 miles to their one. If we find the galleys, we will look in here on our way back, and if they have not left, we will fire that craft more effectually, and then the pirates will be trapped, and we can leave them till we have fetched off Sir Louis and his prizes, and then have a grand hunt here. We took no prisoners before, and 100 slaves will be a useful addition to our wall builders. Now, Tresham, I have to thank you warmly, for Harcourt and I doubly owe our lives to you. It was thanks to your quickness of wit that we regained our boat, for I would not have given a ducat for our chances had you not thought of that scheme. In the second place, we should assuredly have been overtaken again had it not been for your happy thought of crippling them by burning their sails. By St. George, Harcourt, this young countryman of ours is as quick and as ready of wit as he has shown himself a brave and gallant fighter. We have no lack of sturdy fighters, but the wit to devise and to seize upon the right thing in the moment of danger is vastly more rare. As for myself, I have no shame that this lad, who is young enough to be my son, should have thus, twice in a single hour, pointed out the way to safety. With sword and battle-axe I can, I trust, hold my own with any man, but my brain is dull when it comes to hatching schemes. If we live, we shall see Sir Jervis one of the most distinguished knights of the order. While I feel gratified indeed, as I may well be by your commendation, Sir John, I must, under your favour, say that you have given me a far greater degree of credit than is my due. There was the fire, and there was the sail, and the thought that the one would destroy the other was simply a natural one, which might have occurred to a child. As to the plan about the boat, seeing that there was the hill and the wood, it flashed upon me at once that we might make a circuit and come back to her. Just so, lad, but those thoughts did not flash upon my mind, nor upon that of Harcourt. It is just because those sort of ideas do flash upon the minds of some men, and not of others, that the first rise to the rank of distinguished commanders, while the others remain simple knights who would play their part in a charge or in the defence of a breach, but would be of no account as leaders. Now row along steadily, men, he went on, speaking to the slaves. We are still in good time, for it was not an hour from the moment we touched the island to our departure from it, and much of that time we have gained by the speed with which you rowed before. At any rate, we shall make out the island before sunset, and whether we arrive there a little sooner or later matters little. Harcourt, hand me that wineskin and a goblet. A draught will do us good after our climb and swim, and these good fellows will be none the worse for a cup also." Inspired with the hope of freedom, the slaves rowed steadily, and the sun had just set when they entered a little inlet in the rocky isle that was their place of rendezvous. "Thanks be to the saints!" Sir John exclaimed as they reached the entrance. "There is Santoval's galley." There was a stir on board the galley as the boat was seen approaching. The knights had put on their armor, which they had found still lying in the boat, the pirates, in their haste to pursue, having left her unexamined, while those who had remained on guard had abstained from touching anything until the return of their captain and comrades. "Whence come you, Sir John, and what is the news?" "No misfortune has befallen Ricord's galley, I hope," the Spanish knight in command shouted, as the boat came near enough for him to recognize the features of its occupants. "All is well," Sir John shouted back, "but we have taken more prizes than we can manage, though not without hard fighting. 7 knights have fallen, and at least 10 others will not be able to buckle their armor on again for some time to come. So I have been sent here to beg your assistance, and it is well that it should be given speedily. For if more pirate vessels come up before you join, Ricord and his companions will be in a sorry plight." By this time the boat had reached the side of the galley, and as Sir John and his 2 companions stepped on board, the knights crowded round to hear the details of the news. Exclamations of approval and satisfaction arose when Sir John related the incidents of the fight, and told them that the 4 vessels that had fallen into their hands formed part of Hassan Ali's fleet. "That is good news indeed, Boswell," Don Santoval said, "and I would I had been there to take part in so gallant a fight. It is well you found us here, for with 4 prizes on hand, and with half his strength dead or disabled, Ricord must be in sore need of aid. We will start tomorrow morning at daybreak. As all the ships were taken, there is little fear of any of the other pirates hearing news of what has happened." "I don't know," Sir John replied. "There were, as I told you, some 200 pirates left on the island. About half those, we know, seized a fishing boat and escaped, for they chased us, and we have had as narrow an escape from death as has ever fallen to my lot, though I have been in over a score of hard-fought battles. The rest may well have taken another fishing boat and made off also, for we saw several craft along the shores of the island. If so, they may have made for Hassan Ali's rendezvous, wherever that may be, just as I made here, and by this time some of his ships may be on the way there. By St. Anthony, this alters the situation gravely," Don Santoval said. "Fellow knights, we must lose no time in going to Ricord's assistance. The slaves have had a long row today, but they must start on another. Let them have a good meal to strengthen them, and a cup of wine each. Whatever their scruples at other times, they never refuse wine when there is heavy work to be done, knowing full well that a draught of it helps them mightily in their labors. Your men must have rowed well, Sir John, to have brought you here so quickly?" "I have promised them their freedom," Sir John said, "and they shall have it, even if I have to pay their value into the treasury. As I told you, we were hotly pursued, for the craft with her sail went faster than we with our oars, and, knowing the importance of bringing the news here, I encouraged them by promising them their freedom, should we get away. Not only did they row right manfully, but they proved faithful in our extremity, and, when all seemed lost, stuck to us instead of deserting and joining the pirates." "But how did you get away, Sir John, if their craft outsailed you?" "I owe my life entirely to the quick wit of my young countryman, Sir Gervase Tresham here." And Sir John then related the incidents of their adventure on the island, his narrative eliciting warm expressions of approval from the knights. "Of course, you will go with us, Boswell?" Don Santoval said, when the master of the slaves announced that these had eaten their meal and were ready. "I must do so," Sir John replied. "I want you, on your way, to look in at that island where we had so narrow an escape, and if we find their craft still there we can destroy it. The place is directly in our course, we shall, therefore, lose but little time in looking in. Of course, they may have gone as soon as they got their vessel afloat, but it is hardly likely. They would have no idea of my returning with a galley so soon, and will probably set to make a dozen more oars before they start, for she had but 4 on board, which will scarce suffice to send her a mile an hour through the water. Therefore, I fancy they will not put off until tomorrow morning. If that is so, and we..." Chapter 6 Knighted. At 3 in the morning all on board the galley were astir. A ration of bread and meat was served out to the slaves, and the boat was soon afterwards under way. The rowers of the English knight's boat had been warmly commended by the commander and placed in charge of the overseer, with instructions that they were to be treated as free men. As soon as the galley slaves set to work, however, they seated themselves on the benches and double-banked some of the oars, anxious to please the knights. With the exception of those whose turn it was to be on watch, most of the knights slept until daybreak. "At the rate we are rowing, Gervase," Harcourt said, as they went up onto the poop together, "it will not take us very long to join our friends. We are going through the water at fully 6 miles an hour, and as we have already been 2 hours under way, in another 3 we shall be there." An hour and a half later they passed the island where they had landed. The 2 young knights pointed out to the others the valley into which they had descended, and the point round which they had swum. In a few minutes they caught sight of the landing place. "Look, Gervase, there is something black showing just above the water." "I see it. I think it is a line of timbers. There were certainly no rocks there when we ran ashore." "Then Santoval must have found the craft still there and burnt her," one of the knights standing by remarked, "and the pirates are caged up. It will take them some time to make a raft that will carry them to the next island, and before they can do that we shall be back again. I shall be sorry if they escape, for they are as ruthless a set of villains as sail the seas." The galley had traversed half the remaining distance when the sound of a gun was faintly heard. For a moment there was an absolute hush on the poop, then 3 or 4 shots in rapid succession were heard. "Some more pirate ships must have come up," the commander exclaimed. Then he shouted down to the slaves, "Row, men, row for your lives. Overseer, do not spare your lash if any hang back from their work." The galley had been traveling fast before, but her speed greatly increased as the slaves rowed their hardest. Fast as she was traveling, the impatience of the knights was extreme. They walked up and down the deck, making vows of candles that should be burnt at the shrine of St. John if they arrived in time to take a share in the fight, stopping at times to listen to the sound of artillery, which was now so frequent as to show that a severe engagement was being fought. Many of the younger knights ran down to the waist and double-banked the oars, and in a shorter time than it seemed possible the galley arrived at the mouth of the bay. A desperate fight was going on. Ricord's ship lay, idle and deserted, at anchor. 5 pirate craft surrounded Santoval's galley. 2 of them were alongside of her, the others were raking her fore and aft with their shot. The young knights left the oars, sprang up to the poop and joined in the shout of encouragement raised by the others, and then, resuming their helmets and armor, stood ready to leap on board an enemy as soon as they reached her. Piccolomini directed the helmsman to lay him alongside one of the ships grappling with Santoval. As they came up, their galley's cannon poured their fire into her, and a moment later the knights sprang on board. In the din of battle their shout had been unheard. The pirates thronging the other side of their ship were intent only on overcoming the resistance of the knights, and even the discharge of cannon had not called their attention to their foe, until the latter, shouting the war cry of the order, fell suddenly upon them. A panic at once seized them. Some were cut down almost unresistingly, but the great majority, running to the bow or stern, threw themselves overboard and swam to the other ships. The pirate ship on the other side of Santoval's galley instantly threw off the grapnels and thrust off from her side, and, immediately hauling in the sheets of the big sail, began at once to draw away, while her 3 consorts made for the mouth of the bay. "Back to your galley, comrades," Piccolomini shouted, "or with this brisk wind they will escape us." The knights at once crossed onto their own craft, the oars were got out, and the chase began. A minute or 2 later Don Santoval followed them, but soon gave up, as so large a number of the oars had been broken when the 2 pirate ships ran alongside him, that it would have been hopeless to pursue. The wind was blowing freshly, and was rapidly increasing in strength, so that, in spite of the efforts of the galley slaves, the pirates gradually drew away, running straight before the wind, and aiding the effects of the sails with oars. Seeing the hopelessness of the chase, Piccolomini abandoned it, after rowing for 2 miles, and returned to the island. The other 2 galleys were lying beside each other, and Piccolomini had his craft steered alongside them. "Thanks, Piccolomini, for arriving so opportunely," Santoval, who was seated on the deck leaning against the bulwarks, said, as his fellow commander leapt on board, and came towards him. "Would that I had arrived sooner, Santoval, for I see that you have been grievously wounded." "Ay," One of the Paynim's cannonballs has carried off both my legs below the knee. The leech has been searing the wounds with a hot iron, and says that he thinks I shall get over it, but if so I fear that my fighting days are past, unless, indeed, I fight seated on a chair. However, I ought not to grumble. I have lost many brave comrades, and others are wounded more sorely than I am. Sir Louis Record now joined them. He embraced Piccolomini warmly. I never heard a more welcome shout, Piccolomini, than that which you gave when you fell upon the Moslems, for in truth the issue of the conflict was doubtful. I was delighted when this morning at daybreak Sandoval's galley rode in. We had all kept watch during the night, thinking the pirates might obtain boats and make an attack upon us, and, with but 20 of us fit to wield a sword, our position would have been a bad one, and at any rate they might have recaptured the prizes. We agreed that Sandoval and his knights should land at once. This they did. Sir John Boswell had of course told me how his boat had been chased by a fishing craft, manned by a large number of the pirates, and that he feared the rest might similarly have escaped, and might have gone to bring some more of Hassan Ali's ships upon us. As soon as Sandoval landed, some of the natives came down and told him that there was not a pirate remaining there, the rest having started in another boat a few minutes after the one that had chased Boswell. Sandoval left 2 of his men with orders to ascend to the highest spot on the island, and to keep watch, and then brought the rest off to his galley. Our first step was, of course, to send all the women and children ashore. Then we consulted as to what had best be done if the pirates should come back in force. We hoped, at any rate, that this would not happen until you arrived. We expected that you would be here before noon, but we decided that, should they get here before you, we from our galley would embark on Sandoval's, as it was better to fight in one strongly manned boat than to divide our forces. It was scarce half an hour after Sandoval came down before the men left on the lookout appeared on the beach. On fetching them off, they told us that as soon as they reached the top of the hill they saw 5 vessels approaching with sails and oars, and that they would be here in half an hour at the outside. We at once abandoned my galley, brought the rowers and the wounded here, and prepared for the fight. As you saw, they ran their 2 biggest ships alongside us, and for 2 hours the fight went on. They were crowded with men, who in vain strove to get a footing on our decks. Had we only had these 2 to deal with, we should have had nothing to fear, heavily manned though they were, but the other 3 kept sailing backwards and forwards, discharging their guns into us as they passed, firing not only shot, but bags of bullets. Their gunners were skillful, and, as you see, they have completely riddled our poop. 20 knights have been killed, and 11 others are sorely wounded. Scarce one has escaped unscathed. You may guess, then, how welcome was your aid, which we had not expected for another 3 hours. We were on the point of abandoning the waist and gathering on the poop, which we could still have defended for a considerable time, when, as if dropped from the skies, you fell upon the pirates, and turned the tables. How is it that you were here so early? We started at 3 o'clock, instead of waiting for daybreak. It seemed, from the story of the 2 young knights, that it was possible you might be attacked early, and, crippled as your command was, and with 4 prizes on your hands, I deemed it best to come on as soon as the rowers had had a few hours' rest. It is well that you did so. It would have been a grievous affair had 2 of our galleys been captured by the pirates. It would have been a blow to the prestige of the order, and would have brought such strength to Hassan Ali and other pirate leaders that nothing short of sending out a fleet would have recovered our ascendancy, and as every ducat we can spare has to be spent on the fortifications, it would have been a misfortune indeed had we been obliged to fit out such an expedition at present. Who have fallen, Sir Louis? 5 more of the knights of my galley, Pierre des Vines, Raoul de Montpellier, Ernest Schmidt, Raymond Garcia, and Albert Schenk. Here is the list of the knights of Sandoval's galley. 'Tis a long list, and a sad one, Piccolomini said, after reading the names. With the 7 who fell in your first fight, 27 knights have fallen, all brave comrades. Truly, we can ill spare such a loss. It is true there are 5 prizes to show for it, and we have struck Hassan Ali a blow that will resound through the Levant, but the cost is heavy. It is indeed, Ricord agreed. The 4 vessels are well filled with rich spoil that the scoundrels had gathered, and I doubt not the one you captured is equally rich. Still, had they been 10 times as valuable, the booty would be dearly purchased at such a price. There was now a consultation among the leaders, and it was agreed that 6 knights should be placed in each of the captured ships, with 10 of the galley slaves to work the sails, the other. Sir John Boswell, with Ralph Harcourt and Jervis Traceham, went in a boat to the rendezvous we had arranged, and reached it after an adventure which I will leave Sir John to tell himself. I may say that the two young knights named had in our encounter both obtained very high credit amongst us all for the valor with which they fought. No one bore himself more stoutly, and I am glad to take this early opportunity of bringing their conduct before your notice. As you will learn from Sir John, Jervis Traceham afterwards showed a quickness of wit that was the means of saving the lives of those with him, and I may say also of all with me, for had they failed to reach the rendezvous we should have fallen easy victims to the 5 ships Hassan Ali brought against us. Sending for Sir John Boswell, the Grand Prior heard from him the details of his adventure in the boat. I am right glad to hear you speak so warmly of Traceham, Sir John, for I regard him as my special protégé, and am pleased indeed to find that at this outset of his career he has proved himself not only a brave knight, but full of resource, and quick at invention. I think, Sir John, that these two young knights have shown themselves well worthy of receiving the honour of secular knighthood. Assuredly they have, Sir John agreed. Then, Sir John, will you bestow it upon them? The order, as an order, does not bestow the honour, but its members do not forfeit their right as knights to bestow it individually, and none among us are more worthy of admitting them to your rank than yourself. I would gladly do it, Sir Peter, but the honour would come far better from yourself, and would not only be more highly prized by them, but would be of greater value in the eyes of others. I am but a simple knight commander of the order, and my name would scarce be known beyond its ranks. But to be knighted by one whose name is known and honoured throughout Europe would give them a standing wherever they went, and place them on a level with the best. If that is your opinion, Boswell, I will myself undertake it, and will do it at once. It were better done here than at a conclave of the order, now, when they are fresh from the battle. Let the knights be summoned from the other galleys at once. In a few minutes the whole of the knights were assembled on the poop of the galley. Friends and brother knights, Audiobooks said. First, in the name of the order, I have to thank you all most heartily for the brave deeds that you have performed, and for the fresh honour you have won for it. Every man has, as I learned from the 3 commanders, borne himself as a true and valiant knight, ready to give his life in the cause of the order and of humanity. 2 names have been specially brought before me by Commander Record, and by the good knight Sir John Boswell. They are those of 2 young companions who, though knights of our order, have not yet received secular knighthood, and this, in the opinion of these 2 knights, they have right worthily won. Sir Ralph Harcourt and Sir Jervis Traceham, step forward. The 2 young knights, colouring with pleasure at this unexpected honour, removed their helmets, and stood with bowed heads before the Grand Prior. Audiobooks went on, turning to the knights around him, I am about, comrades, to undertake the office of knighting them. Sir Louis Record and Sir John Boswell stand as their sponsors. But before I proceed I would ask you all whether you, too, approve, and hold that Sir Ralph Harcourt and Sir Jervis Traceham have proved themselves worthy of the honour of secular knighthood at my hands. There was a general reply in the affirmative, the answer of the survivors of Record's crew being specially emphatic. The Grand Prior drew his sword, and the 2 young knights knelt before him, their sponsors standing beside them. Sir Ralph Harcourt, you have now been for years a knight of this order, but hitherto you have had no opportunity of drawing sword against the infidels. Now that the chance has come, you have proved yourself a true and valiant brother of the order, and well worthy of the secular accolade. It is in that capacity that I now knight you. It is not the Grand Prior of Oven, but Sir Peter Audiobooks of the Grand Cross of St. Louis, who now bestows upon you the honour of secular knighthood. He touched him lightly with the sword. He then turned to Jervis. You, Sir Jervis Traceham, are young indeed to receive the honour of secular knighthood, but valour is of no age, and in the opinion of your commanders, and in that of your comrades, you have proved yourself worthy of the honour. You have shown, too, that, as Sir John Boswell has related to me, you are not only brave in action, but able, in the moment of danger, to plan and to execute. You were, he tells me, the means of saving his life and that of your comrade, and, by thus enabling him to bear to the place of rendezvous the news of Sir Louis's danger, were also the means of saving the lives of Sir Louis and his companions, and of bringing home in safety the prizes he had taken. With such a beginning it is easy to foresee that you will win for yourself some day a distinguished position in the ranks of the order, and are most worthy of the honour I now bestow upon you. And he touched him with his sword. The 2 young knights rose to their feet, bowed deeply to Audiobooks, and then retired with their sponsors. They were at once surrounded by the knights, who shook them by the hand and warmly congratulated them upon the honor that had befallen them, receiving equally warm congratulations on their arrival at the auberge of the Langue. The 5 prizes turned out, when their cargoes were landed, to be much more valuable than the cursory examination made by the knights had warranted them in expecting. They contained, indeed, an accumulation of the most valuable contents of the prizes taken by the pirates for a long time previously, and as these desperadoes preyed upon Turkish commerce as well as Christian, the goods consisted largely of Eastern manufactures of all kinds. Costly robes, delicate embroidery, superb carpets, shawls, goldsmiths' work, and no small amount of jewels were among the spoil collected, and the bulk of the merchandise captured was, 2 days later, dispatched in galleys to Genoa and Marseilles, to be sold for the benefit of the order. D'Aubusson without hesitation carried out Sir John Boswell's promise to the slaves who had rowed his boat. They were not only set at liberty, but were each presented with a sum of money, and were placed on board a galley, and landed on the mainland. The English knights were all proud of the honor that had been won by their young countryman, the only exception being Robert Rivers, who was devoured with jealousy at their advancement. He did not openly display his feelings, for the reports not only of Sir John Boswell, but of the other 2 English knights, were so strong that he dared not express his discontent. He himself had twice been engaged with pirates, but had gained no particular credit, and indeed had, in the opinion of his comrades, been somewhat slack in the fray. He was no favourite in the auberge, though he spared no pains to ingratiate himself with the senior knights, and had a short time before been very severely reprimanded by the bailiff for striking one of the servants. "I have more than once had to reprove you for your manners to the servants," the bailiff said. "You will now be punished by the septane. You will fast for 7 days. On Wednesday and Friday you will receive bread and water only, and will be confined to the auberge for that period. The next time that I have reason to complain of you, I shall bring the matter before the Grand Master, and represent to him that it were best to send you home, since you cannot comport yourself to the servants of the auberge as befits a knight of the order. We have always borne the reputation of being specially kind to our servants, and it is intolerable that one, who has been but a short time only a professed knight, should behave with a hauteur and insolence that not even the oldest among us would permit himself. There is not one of the servants here who was not in his own country of a rank and station equal, if not superior, to your own, and though misfortune has fallen upon them, they are to be pitied rather than condemned for it. In future you are to give no order whatever to the servants, nor to address them, save when at meals you require anything. If you have any complaints to make of their conduct to you, you will make them to me, and I will inquire into the matter, and if I find they have failed in their duty, they will be punished. I shall keep my eye upon you in the future. There are other faults that I have observed in you. More than once I have heard you address Sir Gervase Traceham in a manner which, were not duelling forbidden by our rules, might bring about bloodshed, and from what I have seen when I have been watching the exercises, he is as much your superior in arms as he is in manner and disposition." This reproof had greatly subdued Robert Rivers, and as he felt that any display of his jealousy of Gervase would be resented by the other knights, and might result in serious consequences to himself, he abstained from any exhibition of it when they returned to the auberge, although he could not bring himself to join in the congratulations offered to them. The next day, however, when he was talking to Ralph Harcourt, he remarked, "From what I hear, Harcourt, D'Aubusson praised young Traceham very highly. It seems to me that there was nothing at all out of the way in what he did, and it was very unfair that he should be selected for higher praise than yourself." "It was not unfair at all," Ralph said warmly, "for he was of a generous nature, and incapable of the base feeling of envy. Traceham did a great deal more than I did. When we saw the pirate boat gaining so fast upon us, it seemed to Sir John Boswell, as well as to myself, that there was scarce a chance of escape, and that all we could do was to choose a spot on which to make a stand, and then to sell our lives as dearly as we could. I could see that Sir John was scanning the hill for a spot where we could best defend ourselves. As to hiding on so small an island, with 100 men eager for our blood searching for us, it was well nigh impossible. It was Tresham's suggestion alone that saved our lives and enabled us to fetch succor to Sir Louis. Sir John, who is an old and tried soldier, said that for quickness and merit of conception, the oldest knight in the order could not have done better, and he is not one to praise unduly. I am 4 years older than Gervase Traceham, but I tell you that were he named tomorrow commander of a galley, I would willingly serve under him." "Well, well, you need not be angry, Harcourt. I have nothing to say against Traceham.